This past week, I've been asking myself some questions. I think it's great to ask yourself questions. But when I ask myself questions, I usually stop with my own answers. It's kind of scary when I ask myself questions because I answer them myself, and when I do that, my answers usually fall into the category of what makes Ed look good, what puts wind in Ed's sail, what gives him significance. But I've been trying to go deeper with the questions. So not only have I been asking myself these questions, I've also been asking God these questions, some pretty deep questions. And when you ask God these questions, it's really interesting the answers that He gives you. In this series over the next several weeks, I'm going to talk about some questions that I've asked God, and then I'm going to reveal to you some answers. And as I unpack this stuff, I'm going to share with you about some details of my life that I've never shared before in a public forum. I'm going to use myself as a guinea pig, a lab rat, if you will. And I think as I do that, several things will unfold. First of all, I think you'll get to know me better, which is cool. I hope. Secondly, I think you'll get to know yourself better because I'm going to challenge you to ask yourself and God these same questions. And then thirdly, we'll get to know the Lord better. And that's the goal of this whole thing. So what I'm going to talk to you about are some questions that I've asked God about myself. It's called WhyI. Now, these answers are not one-word answers or one-sentence answers. They're much more profound than that. And I think as I share with you the pilgrimage that God has taken me on, I think you'll understand a little bit about where I'm going. Today, I'm going to begin with, I would say, the most basic question in life: why do I live? Or you could say, why am I here? We usually ask ourselves that question. Why am I here? Why am I alive? That's a great place to start. Well, the Bible challenges us to ask that question. In Lamentations chapter 3, verse 40, it says, "Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord." So the Bible promises you and me, if we examine ourselves, that it will help us return to the Lord. Here's the question: why do I live? Why do I live? I asked God that question about my life. And here's where He led me as I wrote down some things in my journal. The first reason why I live is because the God of the universe wants me to live. I mean, God made me in His image. He created me to live, not just exist. My life is not just about existing, taking up space and God's grace on planet Earth. My life is not about recreating, procreating, doing deals, and dying. No, my life is much more significant than that. Jesus said in John 10:10, "I've come that they might have life, not existence, and have it to the full." I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad's a preacher, and people ask me all the time, well, what was it like growing up in that environment? And I usually respond by saying, well, have you ever seen an aquarium? People say, well, yeah. And I go, well, that's what it's like growing up at a pastor's home. People are always watching you. I was thinking a couple days ago, I can never remember a time in my life where I was not recognized by a bunch of people I didn't know. When I was little, they wanted to hold me, and now they don't want to hold me. They want to ask me questions, and that's kind of different. So I grew up in that environment, and at a very young age, when I was 8 years old, I became a Christ follower. Because I'd grown up in the church, because my parents are great Christians, I understood the fact as a young guy that I was separated from God because of my sin. I understood that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I became a Christian in a fellowship hall. Do we have any Baptists in the house? If you're a Baptist, lift your hand. I'm a recovering Baptist. Well, Baptists have this big gargantuan room called a fellowship hall. Baptists say they don't drink. But in the fellowship hall, man, they would get into a feeding frenzy. Baptists know how to eat. I mean, they can eat and eat and eat. And in that fellowship hall, in that Baptist church, I became a believer. And God, at a young age, has always been so tender and gracious to me, and he became very real to me at a young age. And so I fell in love with the church and the people in the church. And as a pastor's kid, I moved around a lot. My father did something that was weird. Most of the time, if you know pastors, when they go from one church to the next, they always go to a bigger church and more people, more money. Dad always went the opposite route. He always went to a smaller church, which was very different. So we moved around a lot. We moved from Irwin, North Carolina to Canton, North Carolina, from Canton, North Carolina to Taylor, South Carolina, from Taylor, South Carolina to Columbia, South Carolina, from Columbia, South Carolina to Houston, Texas to Tallahassee, Florida, Tallahassee back to Houston, now to Dallas. It's a lot of movement, a lot of contrast. I had a good time moving because it taught me that people are people, and it taught me how to take some relational risks and to meet some different people. And that was a real exciting thing growing up. When I was a young guy, I fell in love with basketball. Baptist churches usually have a fellowship hall and a gymnasium, so I played basketball a lot because I was at church a lot. And I think I played ball a lot because my father really enjoys athletics and he likes basketball, and he was a pretty good player. So I played and I became a pretty good player. When I was in the 8th grade, I went to a junior high school in Columbia, South Carolina, and this junior high school fed the largest high school in the state, Spring Valley, huge 5A school. I was so good in the 8th grade that the junior varsity coach from the high school plucked me from my junior high existence and put me on the junior varsity team as an 8th grader. So here I am, an 8th grade kid, 13 years old, playing basketball for the largest high school in the state, and I'm hanging around with sophomores and juniors. That was a huge contrast. At an early age, I had to make some major relational and behavioral decisions. For example, who would I run with? Who would I stay away from? What would I put in my body? What would I not put in my body? Where would I go? Where are the places I would not go? I was the only 8th grader in the entire junior high to play for Spring Valley, and a lot of people knew about it. But I made a choice as a young guy to be very intentional about my friendships and relationships. I did not hang out with the popular crowd. I did not hang out with the jocks. I did not hang out with those people. I knew them. I was kind to them. I only had 2 or 3 friends. And I felt a lot of loneliness going to the public schools I attended. I went to very, very tough public schools, economically diverse, racially diverse. There were very tense times in the Deep South. So I'm going to tell you something. If you're a young guy or young girl, if you're a single adult, God never asks you to sacrifice just for sacrifice's sake. Never. Never. He never says sacrifice just because I want you to sacrifice and sacrifice. God asks us to sacrifice, but remember, there's always blessings when we sacrifice. And if you don't believe me, just look at me. You're looking at the result of the sacrifices that God has brought forth in my life. You're looking at the results of the blessings. Because as a young person, I stayed away from that stuff that would get me all messed up and wheels off. I didn't smoke the weed, didn't have sex with all the girls, did not do that. At a young age, I wanted to honor God. Now, I was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I made that choice. I played my 9th grade year, and during my 9th grade year, something significant happened in my life. This hot girl joined our church. Her name was Lisa. All the guys were like, "Man, have you seen this girl?" And I was kind of intimidated to talk to her. A mutual friend of ours, David Bubbles Swindler, that's right, Bubbles, gave me a note. I opened the note up. It said, "Ed, call Lisa. She would love to hear from you." So I called Lisa on the phone, we talked, and the rest, as they say, is history. Bubbles help us make that love connection, you know. David Bubbles Swindler, what a guy. I found out that Lisa did not put Bubbles up to giving me the note. He just did that on his own, so don't think that. What's so funny about it was after Lisa and I had been talking to each other or dating for 3 months, I said, Lisa, you might think I'm crazy, but I'm going to marry you one day. She was like, marry me? I'm going to become a flight attendant and travel the world. That's what she said. Marriage? But I persisted and pursued, and now she's my wife. We've been married for 24 years. That was quite an experience. So during that time, I again began to play more and more basketball. I had an opportunity after my sophomore year to be invited to an invitation-only basketball camp. The best players in the East converged in a small town in Georgia, Milledgeville, Georgia. 250 college scouts were there to watch us play 5 games a day. And I was fortunate enough to have several good games. And so a lot of schools began to talk to me, Notre Dame, NC State, Florida State, Oregon, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thinking, man, I might have a chance to play college basketball. I mean, I might play major college basketball because things were going well, and I was dating this beautiful girl who was a great Christian, and we were involved there at the church, and I'm thinking this is going to be awesome. I'm going into my senior year now, and this is going to be the best. It's going to be off the hook. Well, at the end of my junior year in high school, my father walked in and announced to us that we were moving to Houston, Texas. It's a big change. Houston, Texas. The land of cowboys and cactus and, you know, big hair and all that. Houston? Dad, I'm going into my senior year. I mean, I have a chance for a full ride. Houston. And the more we talked about it and our family prayed about it, the peace of God came over us, and I knew it was the right thing to do as a young guy. I knew it. I knew God was in it. So it was a difficult thing to say bye to Lisa. We'd been dating for over 2 years, and we made the move to Houston, over 1,000 miles away. And I thought, okay, I can finish up my high school career, and wherever I get a scholarship, Lisa and I will just go to that same school, then we'll get married. So that was the plan. Now, I want to talk to you again about this contrast thing, because you're talking about contrast. I grew up in a very, very middle-class environment. We wore blue jeans and T-shirts to school. That was it. We moved from the deep south to an area of Houston. I moved from a middle-class existence to, how can I put this, Highland Park on steroids. Dad moved from a church in South Carolina that had thousands to a church that was running only 700 people. I was thinking, man, this is really odd. It was a culture shock for me. Going to high school with all these wealthy people. To show you how ignorant I was going like, man, what are those horses on people's clothes? That's polo, man. Where have you been? I remember seeing several cars that had these big hood ornaments, these round hood ornaments with things like that. What is that? That's a Mercedes. That's a Benz. I didn't even know what they were. That year in Houston was a very, very tough year for me because I had a coach that not only betrayed me, but betrayed my family. After 10 or 15 games, I caught a severe case of mononucleosis. But preseason, man, I was picked by Dave Campbell as one of the top 12 recruits in the state of Texas, and everything was going great. But I had to quit during the middle of my senior year. So if any of you know anything about athletics, you know if you don't play your senior year, at least most of it, I mean, your dreams are dashed. It's history, lights out. And a lot of the schools that were talking to me backed off. But because I played well in some camps and I did, pretty good in South Carolina, the head coach at Florida State signed me to a full scholarship, and he was generous enough to get Lisa into Florida State too. That was good. Very good. So I spent a year in Houston, graduated there from the high school, and then, I can't believe my parents did this, and then my parents drove 1,003 miles to Tallahassee, Florida, and dropped me off in Sodom and Gomorrah. I moved into a co-ed, privately owned dorm. The basketball players had their own rooms, maid service. Very nice. This dorm had a full bar on the bottom floor, hard liquor, everything. Lisa lived in the dorm, not with me, but with some roommates. And I met some pretty crazy people down there. Florida State basketball, Division I. Wow. I thought to myself, this is it. This is it. My head coach, a really nice guy, was kind of open, you might say. Our team was rated in the top 25 my freshman year, top 14 my sophomore year. And our coach was known to recruit just incredible athletes. Incredible athletes. We had guys that should have played at North Carolina, Duke, UCLA. In fact, many did. But because of their criminal activity or drug abuse, they were thrown out of these schools. And our coach would say, welcome, come to Tallahassee. We'll take care of you. Ed will keep you calm. That's why he recruited me. See, I was a calming force. I could pray before every game, lead the team in prayer. It was awesome. In high school, I was a star player. I scored pretty much when I wanted to, but, Florida State, it's a different world. The two guys that played in front of me played in the NBA, and as a freshman, I had a hard time even bringing the ball up court in practice. They were so quick. And then if you ever made it around one of those guys, you had three guys who were from 6'9" to 7'2" who could jump out of the gym to throw your shot into the upper deck. So it was a rude awakening, It was like, wow, man, this is unbelievable stuff. And, I was really, really persecuted for my faith at Florida State. I was the only Christian on the team. 700 people were in our dorm. Only 3 out of 700 went to church. And my teammates were like, man, what's wrong with you? Why don't you smoke the weed with us? Why don't you do the dope with us? All these hookers on road trips. What's wrong? You're not even having sex with them, nor Lisa, man. What is wrong with you? I mean, day in and day out, day in and day out. And I felt large levels of loneliness. And I went through depression because, it was just falling apart for me. Yeah, by God's grace and power, He gave me the ability to remain strong. But every day before practice, I remember I would get there early, get all taped up and our uniforms on, and I would go up this staircase to this little window overlooking our gym where we practice, and I would say, God, I give basketball, I give this whole thing to you. I'm in Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know why I'm in this hellhole. Use me, God, in any way possible. I had to pray that over and over and over again every single day. I met a guy on my team named Rodney. Rodney was the wildest guy on the team. Phenomenal athlete. Everybody was scared to death of him. And the coach would always put me with him on road trips. Rodney and I had a couple of discussions about my life, Christianity, but nothing in depth. He was like talking to a brick wall. My freshman year, I did this pretty much the whole year. All right, here's some Gatorade. We play on ESPN or some other national television show. My mom would call, honey, I saw you. Your hair looked great on the bench. And during the starting lineups on television games, I'd try to get to the end of the line so the camera could see me clapping for the other. It's pitiful, pitiful. But Lisa, man, she went to every single game right there. Saw my back the whole game. Rodney, my wild friend, well, all of them are wild, but my wheels off friend, Rodney, was a prophet. Because one day he said, you know what? I got a good name for you, the Reverend. You act like a Reverend. So everybody on the team started calling me the Reverend, the Reverend. He was a prophet, wasn't he? Oh, Rodney, what a guy. So at the end of my freshman year, there was an NBA player who came down to practice with us and play, and he was really nice to me and gave me a lot of confidence, and I began to improve. And that summer, I was able to play with a bunch of NBA players from Houston, and I got my confidence. And in my sophomore year, I won a starting position against Auburn. I was like starting. I thought, man, this is it. I'm starting as a sophomore. Our team is a top 25 team. We started the season 14th in the nation, lost a couple of games. So I said, man, this is incredible. So I remember calling my parents and going, Mom, Dad, I'm starting at this game. This is going to be the ultimate, you know? And I'll never forget it. The announcer said, starting at guard, number 12 from Houston, Texas, 6'2", 172 pounds, Ed Young, walked down to the court. Yeah. I thought to myself, this is it. I'm standing here in short shorts. This was the 80s, you know. Tube socks, trying to put a leather ball through an iron ring. So this is my life. Wow, this is it. It was like God just said, there's something more. I had an okay game, and I did all right my sophomore year. Played a lot sometimes, didn't play for 4 or 5, sometimes 10 games straight, but I was there, man, supporting the team. And during my sophomore year, I went to this Bible study at our church, and the college pastor said, I'm going to challenge you to do something. I'm going to challenge all of you to pray that God would bring a non-Christian into your life. I was like, bring a non-Christian. All these church people were like, oh yeah, okay, amen. I'm like, whoa, if you only knew Rodney. And our coaches were as crazy as the players. You know, and I've talked to a number of people who played college athletics, and the weirdest thing, we had no training rules at Florida State. We'd take road trips. We'd have rent-a-cars at our disposal. Can you imagine turning our team loose on Bourbon Street because we played University of New Orleans? Man, no curfew the night before the game. I had to keep Rodney calm. I can't believe I was there. I really can't. Only by God's grace. Only by God's grace. Well, then this pastor said, not only do I want you to pray that God will bring a non-Christian into your life, I want you to ask God to give you the words to say to them about Jesus Christ. I thought to myself, now that is a good challenge. I've never really shared Jesus with someone. I mean, that's pretty stout. So that night, I went back to my dorm room in Cash Hall, hit my knees, the rest of my elbows on that air conditioning unit, looked out over a darkened parking lot. I said, God, give me the words to say to these people you've brought into my life. The next day, I'm walking to class with, let's just say his name is Scott. We're walking together. Scott goes, hey, Ed, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? I said, no. He said, man, you might get kind of mad, but I was in your room the other night, and I took this notebook thing you had, and I began to read through it. And automatically I knew he was reading my journal. And I write some pretty intimate stuff in my journal as I pray. I'm like, what? You read my journal without asking me? He said, yeah, man, just wait. He said, there's something different about you. I've been watching you, the way you handle yourself, the way you treat Lisa. Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes. He goes, I want what you have. I was like, wow. I just prayed for this opportunity the night before. So that night in Scott's dorm room, through my stutterings and stumblings and fumblings, I had the opportunity to lead him into a personal relationship with Christ. That Sunday, Lisa and I took Scott to our church. And for the first time, I saw church through his eyes. It was like, man, this music, the words, he's not connecting with it. I mean, this pastor, he's using Christianese, and he does. Scott's lost. He doesn't understand what's going on. When Lisa and I were 19, I didn't realize it then, God was planning the vision and the style of Fellowship Church in our lives. What could have happened in Scott's life if Fellowship Church had been in Tallahassee, Florida? I don't know. I think his life would be different than it is today. Why do I live? Because God made me to live. Why do I live? Because God has used a kaleidoscopic range of environments and influences and people to give me the impact that I'm having now in my life. From there, I went back to Houston between my sophomore and junior years, began to speak to a lot of students and do a lot of camps. And God began to tug at my heart. I felt this leading, this pull, this calling, if you will, to go into the ministry. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. I've worked my entire life since I've been 8 years old to play college athletics. Here I am. And I knew I was not going to be a star player, especially at Florida State, but I was like, okay, I've got a free ride, a full ride. You mean, God, I should give this stuff up? And I would begin to feel that. I felt a disconnect even from basketball, which was my identity. So I remember walking in to my father's bedroom one night, and I said, Dad, you know, I think I'm feeling led to go into the ministry. Here's what my father told me. He said, son, if you can do anything else and be happy, do that. Don't go into the ministry. Unless it's the only thing that you know for sure that God wants you to do. I was like, whoa. Yes, sir, you know. Obviously, my parents never forced or coerced us to go into the ministry. You can tell by that interchange with my father. Went back to Florida State, and right before my junior year, I just knew, man, this is it. I've got to give this stuff up. And God just spoke to my spirit and said, Ed, give it up. So I walked into the coach's office. I said, Coach, listen, I'm really feeling led, I think, to go into the ministry, and Lisa and I are going to get married soon, so I want to give up the scholarship. And he was like, yeah! No, he was like, now we can get a real player. Okay, see you later. But no, he was very kind to me. He said, you know, thanks for being here. Appreciate your influence on the team, blah, blah, blah. And he said, you want to stay here and you can help us out, even like kind of being a quasi-assistant coach. I said, no, I need to go back. I need to go back to Houston and finish up and get married. So I moved back to Houston. Lisa and I got married. And then I moved from Florida State, and I finished up at this small Christian school. Talking about a contrast. Woo, that was funny. Lisa and I got married and finished up my undergrad. Then I was ordained into the ministry, and they had this big service for several of us being ordained in the ministry. And after the service, I was standing down front, and then I was preparing to go to seminary over the next 4 years. So I'm standing down there, and people were coming by. Oh, we're so happy. You're following in your father's footsteps, all those things. God bless you, and we're praying for you. Really nice stuff. And thank you, thank you, thank you. All of a sudden, this guy walks up to me. He's like, he just hugs me. I mean, a big frontal hug. I'm like, whoa. He's like, yeah, I'm so proud of you. And I'm thinking, who is he? I've never seen him before. He said, man, I know you were a star player at Florida State. And for you to give up your basketball career for the ministries is awesome, man. I said, I was a bench warmer. I only lettered 1 year, only started 2 games. I was not a star. You're just being humble. You're just being humble. No, I'm not. And then he walked off, and I said, Lisa, who was that idiot? And somebody goes, I think he's an attorney. I said, oh, okay. So the next night, Lisa and I are sitting there in our apartment, our little apartment, newlyweds. I'm waiting to go to seminary, All of a sudden, the phone rings, 10:30. I pick it up. The voice on the other end goes, Ed? I'm thinking, who is this? I go, excuse me, I don't recognize the voice. He goes, I was the guy that got emotional last night. And anyway, Ed, tomorrow morning I'm flying out with George Foreman, the former heavyweight champion of the world, and a writer from Sports Illustrated, Gary Smith, and we're going to an Olympic gold medal winner banquet and wondered if you wanted to go along with us. I said, just 1 second. Yes, I will. I'll be there. Now, let me press the pause button for a second. Ever since I shared the gospel with my teammate Scott, I was praying that prayer consistently. God, you bring non-Christian people, disconnected people, de-churched people into my life and give me the words to say to them. The next morning, I find myself in first class, George Foreman on my right, the writer from Sports Illustrated on my left, my friend across the aisle. We're flying to Los Angeles. I'm thinking, it was surreal. So we're, flying along, and we land, and this big limousine picks us up, and we drive through Beverly Hills and pull up to this really posh hotel. We get out, security everywhere, and then we walk up the back steps, and we make our way into this little room, and it's this cocktail party, and I look, and I see all these Olympic gold medalists, Bruce Jenner, Edwin Moses, look at this, unbelievable. I was like, I was trying to be cool. I was like, and then George Foreman and my friend said, Ed, let's walk this way. So we turned and walked this way, and I see Muhammad Ali stand up. He hugs George Foreman, and I'm standing there like this. And my friend goes, Muhammad, I want you to meet Ed Young. He was just ordained into the ministry. And Muhammad hugs me, and then gets about 6 inches from my face, and he says, are you a Christian preacher? I said, yes, Muhammad. He goes, I want to talk to you about Jesus. I said, okay. So I sat here sandwiched between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. And Ali has his elbows resting on my knees, this gargantuan guy. And to show you how God works, my father is close friends with Billy Graham, and Muhammad had just been out to Billy Graham's house. This was not in the press. And Ali spent 3 hours talking to Billy Graham about Jesus Christ. So I knew that. That was a total God thing. So we began to talk. And Ali goes, I think Jesus is a white Jesus. I said, Muhammad, Jesus was not white. I said, you're a light-skinned black guy, and his skin tone was probably even darker than yours. And so we started talking on and on about the difference between Islam and Christianity. I said, Christianity is not a works-based deal. the deal has been done. Islam, it's all about do this, you can't do that. It's a different deal. So we went on. And George Foreman, of course, is a Christian. We talked and talked and talked. And then after this long conversation, Muhammad goes, why don't you guys come over to my house? I'm like, I'm ready. And my friend was like, no, we got to get back. He has got class tomorrow. I'm like, so. When you pray that high-risk prayer, you never know who God will put into your path. But I discovered something. People are people. Whether you're Scott or Rodney or Muhammad Ali. White collar, pink collar, polka dot collar, blue collar, people are people, and people need Jesus. I finished up my seminary, 4 years of fun, taking Greek and Hebrew and all the theological courses. In fact, my Hebrew professor came to Fellowship Church last night. He was telling one of our staff members, he goes, man, I can't believe Ed even passed. He was never at class, but I was married and working full-time and going to seminary, so he cut me some slack. Hebrew, man, that was tough. That was very tough. So after seminary, my father, as we talked about last week, is an outstanding leader, and under his leadership and obviously from God's grace, his church grew at the time to the largest church in America. And that was fun to be a part of that and to see what went on. And I did hundreds of weddings there and a lot of funerals, and I did some work on television and spoke a good bit when Dad was out of town. And I just began to feel a strong leading, a calling to pastor my own church. So I said, I want a church to be different. I want a church, I was thinking about the church I would pastor one day, to be a church where anyone could understand what was going on, whether you're a Hebrew professor or whether you're a wheels-off Florida State teammate. I wanted it to be understandable so people could hear and apply what was going on. And I began to study the scriptures and see that God is creative, and I think the church should be the most creative entity in the universe. Boring churches should be unique, not creative ones, because look at Jesus. He was the most creative teacher and leader in the history of the universe. So I began to study how he taught, and we began to do things like that down in Houston. And then I met this church that was starting up in the Irving area of Dallas-Fort Worth. Now, here's what's so hilarious about that. I told all my friends, there's one place I'll never go. I said, I'll never go to Dallas-Fort Worth to pastor. That's the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, televangelists, seminaries, the steeple on every corner. I'm not going there. I want to go either to Miami, Las Vegas, Sacramento, Toronto. I'm not going to Baptist Land, USA. I'm not going up there. I've had enough of that. I'm not going there. Well, don't ever say that to God. Don't ever say that. There were 30 families that were starting a church in Irving, and I met several people who were on a committee to find the pastor of the church. This church was in rented facilities. Everything was projected. They didn't have any staff members, not even a typewriter to show you how long ago it was. It was 15 years ago. So Lisa and I began to talk to these people. We really felt a connection and affinity with them, and we prayed about it. I came up here, and there was a hill overlooking the TPC course in Irving, and I'm thinking houses are there now, but I prayed, and God just spoke to me and said, Ed, I want you to do this. I want you to help this church. I want you to take this position. So it seemed odd, again, a contrast, because I was leaving the largest church in America and moving to Irving. Irving was a horrible place to start a church. I didn't know it, but a terrible place. 80% of church starts fail. And you would not want to start a church in Irving because Irving was a flatlined community. There were no residential growth. Anytime you hear about growing churches, 99.9% of the time, they're around growing communities. I call it dumb growth. Here's a church, there's a steeple, open the door, see all the people. They just show up. Well, in Irving, the people on this committee were great. The location, in my view, horrible. The facilities were awesome. We had a little office complex, and once we met there for a while and outgrew that, we moved to a fine arts complex right across the street. Once we outgrew that, we went to MacArthur High School and we had all this ample parking, so the facilities were great. Anyway, we prayed about it, we said yes, and to be boldly honest with you, the first time I saw the church, everything in my flesh said, leave. You have made a major mistake. But the Spirit of God said, Ed, I want you to stay here. You stay here and you commit to this and you follow me. So we began people ask me all the time, well, I would love to know about your plans at Fellowship Church over the years and all the long-term. We've never had long-term plans or anything. If you'd have told me 15 years ago that we would be here, I would have gone, man, what are you smoking? We had no idea about what God would do. This is a total God thing. I thought it was a bad location. God knew it was a great location. I thought, well, I don't like this or that. God said, you stay with me. Fellowship Church is a complete God thing. We began to do some different things, and we began to think about how Jesus taught. 70% words of application, stories, illustrations, 30% information. He always changed the way he spoke, so we began to change stuff in the church, and God began to bless it, and people began to come to Fellowship Church from all over the Metroplex. But there's something that I was ambushed by as a pastor. Here I'd grown up in a pastor's home, but I had no idea of the stress and the anxiety and the pressure that my father was under 24/7. People always looking at you, watching you, where you live, where you don't live, where you drive, where you don't drive, what you drink, what you don't drink. It is life in a fishbowl. And then people that you trust will stab you in the back. I never had that happen until I became the senior pastor, and I had a lot of people I trusted bolt on Fellowship Church. They bolted because they didn't dig the fact that we were reaching a lot of people. When you start a church, I didn't realize this, you collect a lot of people who are disgruntled from other churches. They're small fish in big ponds, and they want to be a big fish in a small pond, and once that small pond becomes a big pond, they become a small fish in a big pond, and they don't dig it, so they begin to leave, and I almost left myself. I almost bolted after the first year. I went home one night and said, Lisa, I've had enough. I'm sick of this. I didn't sign up for this. I want to do something else. I'm tired of this. I'm out of here. But you know what? Through prayer and through seeking the mind and the heart of God, God kept telling me over and over, Ed, stay with me. You commit. You crash through this quitting point. You negotiate through the tears and this tough time and the dark valleys. You stay with me. And by God's grace, Lisa and I did. God began to build Fellowship Church in even greater ways. And I've discovered every time you go through spiritual warfare, there's always an incredible blessing just around the corner. And most of the time, we bail out right before the breakthrough. And I almost bailed, but I didn't. Had I bailed, I would have missed the greatest ride in my life. Because see, that's that reason I want to describe to you about why I live. That's the third reason, because God has placed this crystal clear calling on my life, and this calling is a continual calling every single day. And sometimes the calling is tough, sometimes it's very challenging, sometimes it's taxing, but the call is there. And over the years, as we grew, we said, you know what, we're outgrowing all this stuff. And we began to grow in Irving, Texas. It's a total God thing. And then we started looking for some land, and we heard about the Resolution Trust Corporation dumping land, and there was 159.2 acres, this tract of land that they were offering. and they were offering a sealed bid type scenario. These companies were bidding, and they submitted sealed bids, and a lot of these companies could have just written a check for the land, no problem. Here's a little fellowship church. Okay, here's our bid. And we bid $2.5 million. And amazingly, the guy that made the decision for the government was a believer, and he picked our bid. One problem, though, we didn't have any money. We found out we had to make a down payment, so our church prayed and went through this great time of sacrificial giving over and above our tithes and offerings, and we were able to put a down payment on the land, and we owed $1.875 million on 159.2 acres in Grapevine. Grapevine Mills wasn't even a thought then. Johnny Morris hadn't even considered putting Outdoor World over there. There was nothing out here. People were like, are you building a golf course or what? A year later, though, without a sign on the property, we sold 22 of the 159 for $1.875 million. Don't ever tell me that God is not in the real estate business. And, you know, I really think the greatest growth in the history of Fellowship Church was those first 8 years in rented facilities. That was just amazing. And now, wow, I just sit back in awe. We have 4 locations. On a good weekend, we will average over 20,000 people in attendance. We have between 9,000 to 10,000 pastors who are connected with Fellowship Church all over the world. I have opportunities right now in my office to travel to South Africa, Korea, and London to tell about what God is doing here at Fellowship Church. Our television show is seen all over the country. We're over in Europe, and people ask me all the time, well, how do you feel? Did you plan this? No. How do I feel? I can't believe it. I want to pinch myself. I'm the most surprised person here. This has been a total God thing. We didn't plan this. This thing has just evolved. Well, Ed, man, that's quite a story. I mean, you're supposed to have a story like that. You're a preacher. Your story is just as powerful, just as interesting, just as intriguing as my story. Have you ever asked God, why do I live? Have you ever charted out your life story? Have you ever outlined your life? Why do you live? I know why you live. Because God has told us why. You live because God wants you to live. You live because God has used a kaleidoscopic range of environments to mold you and shape you and to make you into the kind of person you are right now for His amazing agenda for your life. You live because God has given you a crystal clear calling on your life. That's why you're here. Now, some of you are not really living. You really think your agenda in life is to recreate, procreate, do deals, and die, to take up space and God's grace on planet Earth. I pray, and I've been praying for you for weeks, that you'll move from existence to a life that is all about living. Jesus said it in John 10:10. I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. Do you have a life like that? Many of you can move from existing to living just by praying a prayer, the same prayer that I prayed when I was 8 years old in that fellowship hall. You can say, Jesus Christ, have your way with me. I turn from my sin and turn to you. Others here who are believers, you're existing as a believer. And maybe for the first time, you can look back in your life and realize, wow, God has allowed me to experience this wide range of environments so I can be about His agenda. Are you leveraging that? Are you using that? Are you stepping out and serving in the context of the local church? Are you following your calling? What is your calling? I know what mine is. Do you know what yours is? The calling is there. Chart out your life and see what God does. 2 weeks ago, something happened at Fellowship Church that has not happened in the entire history of our existence. One of my teammates from Florida State showed up and he sat right there in that seat. Right there. Guess who it was? Rodney. The guy who given me the nickname, the Reverend. And as I watched him experience the service, as I watched him in the music and the videos, and as I just kind of made eye contact with him as I was teaching, once again, I saw church through his eyes. Once you do that, you'll never be the same. The next day, Rodney emailed me this. Ed, I just wanted to thank you for making me feel so welcome at your church this weekend. Your staff is awesome, and please say thank you from me for their kindness and generosity. I just wanted you to know I've not felt the way I do today in a very long time. Your service was very uplifting, spiritual, and heartfelt. My self-esteem has been boosted, and I really needed that. Many memories of college days were brought back, and I don't really think about them very much anymore. Thanks for not being judgmental about my past. I'm looking at Sunday as a new beginning for me and my family. My attitude and outlook for the future is much better because of you. I know you get this all the time, but you're really an inspiration to me. Thanks for being a true friend. Hope you don't mind hearing from me from time to time. Rodney. Why do I live? It's people like Rodney. Why do you live? Well, who is your Rodney? Who is your Rodney? That's why you live. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the power of stories. God, today I just shared my story. But I know that every story here is just as powerful, just as interesting, just as prolific as the one I just talked about. And the only reason that I can share my story is because of your grace and your mercy. Father, by your Spirit, just challenge this, your church, to chart out their life story. And I pray that somehow, some way, God, only by you, that every story here can merge into your redemptive story. Some here are existing because they've never received the greatest story, and that is that you loved us so much, you sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross for our sins. And right now, you can have an opportunity to move from existence to really living by saying this. It's simple, but it's the biggest thing you'll ever do. Just say, God, I admit to you that I'm a sinner. I need Jesus. I turn from my stuff, my junk, my rebellion, and turn to you. I ask Jesus to come into my life. If you did that, that's the greatest thing you'll ever do. And now you will understand what it means to live as you walk with God day by day. Others here, I'm talking about Christians, are existing. You're going through the motions. You're not really living. God has used all those experiences, many horrendous experiences, some great experiences. God has used those and wants to use those for His glory so you can live the ultimate life. God's called you. Are you hearing Him? Are you listening? Are you following in His footsteps in obedience? Father, we want to live. And I thank you for answering the deepest questions of life. Continue to probe the depths of our existence over the next several weeks. In Jesus' name, amen.